for people to filter in. All right, hello. My name is Morgan Harding, and I'm an events coordinator at Politics and Prose, and I'd like to welcome you all to PNP Live. First, I will drop a link in the chat for Aftershocks, a memoir straight from PNP's website, and a reminder that we're offering shipping on all orders, or you can come pick it up at any of our 3 locations for no additional cost. You can ask our speakers a question by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to get to as many of those toward the end of the program, but we apologize in advance if we don't have time to address your question. Let us introduce tonight's guest. Nadia Owusu is a Brooklyn-based writer and urbanist. Nadia is the recipient of a 2019 Whiting Award. Her writing has appeared or is forthcoming in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Lily, Orion, the Literary Review, the Paris Review, Daily Electric Literature, Catapult, Bon Appetit, Epiphany, and others. By day, Nadia is the director of storytelling at Frontline Solutions, a Black-owned consulting firm that helps social change organizations to define goals, execute plans, and evaluate impact. She is a graduate of Pace University and Hunter College. She earned her MFA in creative nonfiction at the Mountain View Low Residency Program, where she now teaches. Our moderator tonight is Kwame Adjei-Brenyah, the New York Times-bestselling author of Friday Black. Originally from Spring Valley, New York, he graduated from SUNY Albany and went on to receive his MFA from Syracuse University. His work has appeared in the New York Times Book Review, Esquire, Literary Hub, the Paris Review, and Longreads. He was selected by Colson Whitehead as one of the National Book Foundation's 5 under 35 honorees, and is the winner of the Penn/John Stein Book Award, and is a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle John Leonard Award for Best First Book in Aspen Words Literary Prize. Please give our guests a virtual round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, I guess I'll start with a quick reading, very short, and then Nana, we can have a conversation.
I love it.
All right. I'm going to read from a chapter of Aftershocks called Navel. The one family album I own is divided in 3. The photographs in the first section are of my father's extended family in Ghana. There are photographs of my father and my aunts as children, of my grandparents as newlyweds. I don't recognize some of the people depicted. Perhaps we never met. Or by the time we met, their freshly picked afros had grayed or been shorn, their striped bell-bottoms replaced with sensible khakis. But still, when I look at those photographs, I recognize the setting, the town where my father grew up, where I spent many school holidays. In the second section, I am a toddler on my father's hip, reaching for the wooden tobacco pipe clenched in his mouth. My sister Yasmin and I, arms slung over each other's shoulders, flash half-toothless smiles at the camera against a backdrop of the Serengeti. Flat-topped trees, long yellow grass, clouds low in the sky and pregnant with tropical rain. There I am, being carried on my father's shoulders toward the Eiffel Tower. Yasmin is jumping across the finish line in a burlap sack at the British school in Rome, while Annabelle cheers from the sidelines. There's an 8-year-old me staring lovingly at baby Kwame cradled in my arms, while Yasmin pinches his chubby cheeks. The second section of the album is my favorite because Yasmin and I look so much alike in the photos. We face each other, laugh at each other, hold hands, pull each other's ears, smack each other, sleep on each other's laps in the back seats of cars. We are bent mirror images. We shared clothes. We shared a story. In the photos, we are near symmetrical. We all like to see ourselves reflected. My mother's cursive is smudged on the back of each image in the third section of the album. It informs me that Uncle Aram is at the Armenian picnic in Watertown. Grandma and Grandpa are playing golf in Florida. My two half-sisters are dressed as a robot and a pirate for Halloween. These photographs were enclosed in letters written on pale or pink stationery that smelled vaguely of pears. Yasmin received the same photographs in letters addressed to her. Sometimes we exchanged letters after reading our own. They were largely identical. They were mailed to us when we were in elementary school, and our mother was mostly an abstraction. She was words on paper, a hummed lullaby on a long-distance phone call, a woman standing on our head and laughing in a home movie from a time before we were born. On the days the letters arrived, I could feel my father watching us as we read them. The letters were intimate and cheerful. They told of trips to Walden Pond in the summer and sledding in Boston Common in the winter. They left me with an uncomfortable wistfulness. I would force my face into a silent expression and look up to meet my father's eyes. He would smile, perhaps relieved by my unaffectedness. Sometimes Yasmin cried. I thought two crying daughters would be too much for him, so I trained myself to wait until I was alone in my closet or in the bath. My father would wipe Yasmin's face, hug us both, ask us if we wanted chocolate milk. Good girl, he'd whisper in my ear. I was good because I was restrained. My father, I believe, carried a lot of hurt from his relationship with my mother. He did not like to see the related pain radiating from his daughter's eyes. Those letters taught me about longing. Reading them in front of my father taught me to hide it, often even from myself. I know now what a dangerous kind of denial that is. It leaves you ravenous. It makes your seismometer vibrate when the phone call you are shocked to discover you have been waiting for your whole life offers you precisely what you are terrified to want. Hello, Nadia. This is your mama. I'll stop there.
More virtual applause. Beautiful, beautiful reading. Thank you so much for that. I'm so excited to get to speak with you today. I am so excited for this book. I've got to read it a while ago now, and it's still really, I know it's one of the books of this year.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to see you again.
Yeah, it's really an honor to get to do this. And I feel like this book and its launch is really like a reason to celebrate. And I feel so excited to get to share it with people now, because it's really, I think, a special book. And that small section, just a small glimpse of this beauty. So people, please, I'm not playing around when I say this is one of the books of the year. I'm glad you read what you just read, because there was a line that hit me. We love to see ourselves reflected. And I remember reading this book for the first time and thinking, that there probably has never been a book that I've read that held so much of my own heritage and the history of both myself and my parents in it. And so my first question, I think, is what's it like knowing that for so many, your book will be their first time getting exposed to some of these rich histories?
Oh, thanks for that question. Yeah, it felt really important to me. I started writing this book as a private project for myself, because a lot of the history of Ghana or Armenia, the places where my family came from, the Armenian genocide, colonialism in Ghana, but also sort of what came before colonialism, sort of the rich tradition and culture and the ancient storytelling practice and the music, like none of that was taught to me in school. Of course, I got it from my family, but there weren't a lot of books that I could turn to. When I was sort of searching for my family and for stories about them, they were really hard to come by. And so I kind of started writing this book as a way for me to write a story of the places that my family came from and my family, and to write it in a way that honored all of those traditions, and that was complex, and that also drew from sources that were written by, especially in the case of Ghana, by Ghanaian people, because a lot of the histories that we get of Africa in general are written from a very white Western European perspective.
Yes.
And so I kind of, I wanted to do this mostly for myself, really. And that's how it started. I started doing a lot of research about the Ashanti tribe that my father came from. And that felt really meaningful to me, to just be engaging with those stories in that way. And so when it came time to sort of look at the raw material that I created and ask myself, can I make art out of this? One of the things that got me to yes, because I was very nervous about it, but one of the things that got me to yes was that there are probably so many other people out there who would like to see themselves reflected, as you say. And so it felt like I could. I had already done a lot of the research, and maybe I could give that to other people as well.
So incredible. And and being reflected, it really was something. So just before I read this book, I had gone to Ghana for the first time myself. And I had gotten a little bit of the history of, pre-colonialism and the stool and its importance. But it wasn't until after I read this book that I had this like really hard, like visceral memory of this like replica stool that had been in my family's house like all the time. And I remember just this like important object that I didn't know anything about, but had followed us through several spaces. And I remember reading in reading this book is when I sort of had that awareness of, oh, that was what that was. And then so I really mean it when I say like, I've never felt that part of myself so clearly in anything I've read, really.
Oh, that means so much to me. Thank you for saying
that. So one of the many beautiful qualities of this book is how it moves like memory, at least for me anyways. And you have a style that mirrors memory. And what I mean by that is like you sort of render like an inciting incident on the page, and then that will take us, we'll move so smoothly to, and something that feels natural to a prior moment. And then maybe we'll return. The chapter titled Orphan kind of has some of those moments where you're thinking about your mom and Italy, and then we're in Italy, and through Italy, we go through from there to there. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about representing memory and using memory as a way to move through a book?
Yeah. Thanks for noticing that was something that I was trying to do. So, often the way that I would start, a way in for me, I had done all of this rich research, but then a way in for me was that I would start with a really clear image in my mind of a memory, and I would sit with it and sort of close my eyes and try to draw upon it and evoke it and like feel it with all of my senses, and so that would be sort of the way in. But the way that my mind works is that from there you kind of reach out to make all of these connections to other things, and I think that is the way that our minds work. We sort of meander and wander and draw these connections, and especially it was important to me to write from a place of my own experience, but then also to connect my own experience to all of these larger forces that shaped my family's life, that shaped my life. And in some ways I was trying to, from my memory, write myself closer to those histories and to those stories and to those narratives. And in some ways, writing myself closer to those histories that shaped my parents' decisions, my grandparents' decisions, was a way for me to write myself closer to them as well. Because, I grew up, my father worked for the UN, and so we moved every couple of years, and I didn't really have, what one would think of as like a home base. And I didn't grow up necessarily in the cultures that my parents came from, although, I was raised by my Ghanaian father and was around his family. But I was still always kind of on the border, on fault lines and on the borders. And I think when you're standing in that kind of position, you can't help but sort of reach out and try and find those connections, connect them to other things and memories. And so I wanted the structure of the book to kind of draw from my own lived experience, which was really that I was always living within these larger forces and was always somewhat aware of it. And I wanted to sort of wrestle on the page with how that has shaped my life and my thinking and my worldview.
I love that. And sort of in following in that same line, what felt so impressive is I never felt like really dislocated. I sort of was right there with you. And sometimes it's just because you're so good at putting us right in the moment through sensory images and sort of representation of that in the moment experience, that felt experience. Also, I feel like you're very like smooth and like almost like slick with, I don't know, directions. Like this is going to be a memory, and then sort of easing us into what's going to be a memory that is separate from the previous one, but connecting us. That's connected. I'm wondering how much in initial writing and rewriting, that idea of smoothing the process of reading through these memories, how much that was a consideration and how you kind of make it feel so smooth all the way through like that.
Thanks. I mean, that I feel like I did go through a lot of revision to kind of get there and moved pieces around a lot.
Yeah.
And, I think the more that I wrote within kind of these stories that I knew that I really wanted to tell, the kind of larger and larger they got. And then it was a matter of sort of going in and finding even more connections and figuring out sort of where the different pieces fit together. And I think at one point I'd even sort of cut up most of the manuscript and was moving it around physically,
Wow.
sitting
Wow.
on the floor, moving scenes and memories around to try and find where they fit into the narrative and how they connected to other memories, and then also sort of where that took me in terms of some of the kind of cultural history that I wanted to explore as well.
It's so interesting because, and that again goes into another question I know I had written down. It feels just meticulously and purposefully organized, but it's not necessarily in any strict chronology or organized in a way that one might expect. So I'm interested in like the sort of organizational energy or the sort of organizational principle that you found to be kind of your guiding way.
Yeah, so a few things. So one was that I knew that I wanted sort of a, a seed of a really kind of embodied lived experience to be at the center of each of the pieces,
Yeah.
each of the chapters, and then I wanted to think about sort of what was I hearing at the time, what was going on around me at the time, where was I, what do I know about that place, what should I know about that place, how did what I know or didn't know kind of shape my experience of it, and then how can I honor that place, because we lived in so many different countries. So for example, we lived in Ethiopia during a civil war when I was a child, and we lived in a UN compound. And so although I was very much aware that there was a civil war going on around us, I was a child and my experience was a very sheltered one in that place. And so in writing about that experience as an adult, I felt it really important for me to kind of understand the roots of that conflict, and also sort of what it was like for the people in Ethiopia who were living there on the other side of the wall of the compound where I lived. But it started from sort of me being in this kind of beautiful compound, playing with other children, and being sort of aware that our parents were whispering about the possibility of the war coming to the capital and coups. Like, I very vividly remember hearing those things, but I didn't necessarily know what they all meant. So I started, I guess an organizing principle was that I started from sort of what it felt like and trying to get into an embodied experience, and then following my curiosities around what was going on around me and sort of pulling that sort of history and sort of other threads in from there.
I love that. And it makes me think of this one section. And this is a passage that sticks out in my mind. I think I've mentioned it to you before. It's one of those places where I think this book sort of like almost like hints at itself about what it is and how you think of history and how you think of what it is to tell these kind of stories. And also, I just don't want these people to leave without hearing this one section. So I'll read it real quick here. History is a story, my grandfather said. I offer a friendly amendment. History is many stories. Those stories are written, spoken, and sung. They are carried in our bodies. They billow all around us like copper-colored dust that sometimes obscures everything. In those stories, we grasp at meaning. We search for ourselves, for our place, for direction. We search for a way forward, a woman warrior, a complicated man, an invitation home, a meteor, a lake, a child landing with a splat. Destruction and creation, change in the light, terrain and atmosphere, delicate new freedom, hope. I love that so much. And you spoke a little bit about it, but you're a person who carries like many, many histories in your body and in your experience. And I guess I wonder, and you spoke a little bit about it, but if you could talk a little bit more about like what it is to pull those histories out of yourself and bring them out into the world, and maybe just more on like just your feelings about history in general.
Yeah, so thank you for that, first of all. Once I decided that I was going to try and write a book kind of using the raw material that I started sort of writing for myself and this research that I was doing for myself, I knew that I wanted it to be kind of a genre fluid book, and I
Mm,
knew that I wanted to move, as I said, between sort of my more private griefs and joys and struggles to these larger forces. And I wanted to show how history is always present, which I think we're all uh, reckoning with in this particular moment. But it's always present in our day to day lives, whether we notice it or not. And so, what I wanted to do was really pay attention and notice how it was present in my life. Even, going back to my childhood and sort of resurfacing those memories and connecting them, as I said, to those histories. And so, you know, I I think that the example that you or the short piece that you read, that story sort of starts from a very vivid memory of me being with my father in Ghana, and we had gone to sort of the family, our clan kind of stool house, to see kind of the stools in the stool house and learn about our history and our family's history, which was connected to Ashanti royalty. And we were kids. My sister and I were bored. It was very dry and hot, and we were kind of
yeah.
bouncing off the walls and just not behaving very well. And my dad got very irritated with us and sort of took us to this beautiful lake, because he could see that we needed to maybe cool off. But I remember sort of he kind of tossed me into the air and I landed with a splat in this lake. And my father had told me that the lake was created when a meteor kind of hit the earth, and that made it feel really magical to me. And that memory sticks out to me. But then I was connecting that, once I started writing it, I connected it to sort of the ways that the reverberations of colonialism can continue to influence and shape the lives of Ghanaians even after independence. And so, it's those kinds of connections that I was making, sort of myself in a moment, and then sort of drawing back to write myself into the histories that, I grew up kind of just on the outside of, and really trying to learn and sort of place myself in them in a way that that felt like it was a history and a story that I could embrace and live inside of and be proud of.
incredible. And thinking about an example of a story like that one with your father, there's several loved ones and family members and people that may be estranged now that you translate and really bring to life on the page. And I'm interested in how you do that, and like maybe your advice for other memoirists. How does one bring these people so close to yourself alive on the page?
Well, thank you for that. It was really important to me uh, to not make anybody in my life sort of one dimensional, and to really honor the fullness of everyone's humanity. And because I think I was engaging with all of these histories and sort of thinking about how these larger forces shaped people's lives and decisions and life chances, I was able to sort of contextualize the lives of my family as well, and then to kind of try and imagine what it would be like to make decisions as an adult. When we're children, we, see ourselves as the center of our family's lives and don't really think of our parents, for example, as full human beings who are
Yep.
sort of struggling and making choices. And so I wanted to sort of try to understand, how my family came to break apart, but also like the love that existed before it broke apart, and the love that still exists and exists in the world for me now, and to kind of try to write myself towards forgiveness and reconciliation. That was, I started writing from a place of grief, but then what I found as I continued writing, and I think that's where the people in my life became most alive on the page, was when I started realizing that no, I'm not just writing from a place of grief. I'm writing toward love, and toward love that I can hold in my heart for the people in my life who are complicated people, who, have made some decisions that were hard for me and hurtful to me, but who also have sort of persisted in loving me through all of these estrangements and like these forces that have kind of brought us apart. And so I think that writing toward love is something that I think people can hold, or writing towards connection, especially if you're writing about real people, writing towards understanding, sort of pushing yourself to step outside of, any just your own feelings, and trying to really kind of connect with the people that you're putting on the page.
I love that. That's so, I feel like that's so real. And I think about that in fiction even as well. But I think there's a challenge that comes sometimes with doing with real people, because that may or may not have hurt us actually.
Mm-hmm.
But still, the idea of writing towards love as a way to really get to see them fully and their complicated wholeness is, I think, something that I'll definitely take note of and think of for myself in my own writing. I think that's really, really wise. And I thought of this as you were speaking through that last answer. Another thing about this book does really beautifully is write about real difficulty. And one of the segments that really struck me and actually had me it felt like really close to home, I had to almost put the book down for a little bit, were the blue chair segments, which sort of recreate a mental health crisis, or what some might call a breakdown. And can you talk about what it is to sort of recreate that and write through something like that?
Yeah, so, it was really important to me. Part of the genesis of this book was actually that I was coming out of a period of deep depression and anxiety, that actually sort of brought me to sit in this blue chair in my room. That I dragged this blue chair off the street into my room. For some reason, I felt really connected to it, and I really felt like I needed it. And then, a few days later, I found myself kind of unable to leave my room, in this place of really just deep grief and depression and anxiety. And I sort of felt like I needed to reckon with some of the grief that I had not really allowed myself to look at or feel for much of my life. And part of the reason that I hadn't, when I found myself in that place where I couldn't see a way out of my bedroom or out of this blue chair, was that I had internalized a lot of these harmful narratives that a lot of us hear, about mental illness and about sort of struggling with grief and sadness. And I think, those narratives are dominant narratives. They exist in many cultures. But I think particularly as a Black woman, there are some stereotypes that are placed upon us and that we internalize whether we want to or not. They're in the groundwater. And some of that is that, mental illness is not for you, it's for white people, you don't have time, like that's just, you're just sort of luxuriating in your feelings. What you really should be doing is working twice as hard for half as much. That's what you
Yeah.
need to do. You need to be strong. There's the strong Black woman trope, which, serves us in some ways, because we are going out into a world that in many cases, is trying to tear us down. And so there are reasons that we have those masks, but at the same time, that can be really destructive, to internalize those stories and then carry that shame around, these feelings that we have. And so when it came time to write, this book, I felt like it was really important for me to be really honest about those experiences, and I wanted to write them from, a place of how it felt in the body, and kind of write from inside of it in terms of sort of what I was thinking at the time. Um, and so that's sort of what I set out to do. Because in the same way that I felt like I needed to correct the record, or at least explore other stories and revise some of the narratives around, Ghanaian history or African history or Black American history, for example. And then also, we know that the Armenian genocide has not been recognized still, by Turkey and many other countries around the world. And so in the same way that I felt like I needed to sort of revise those stories and stand sort of in the truth of the experiences of my family, I also felt it was really important for me to stand in the truth of my experience with those struggles, and to sort of write from inside of them, so that, others could, feel hopefully that their feelings are legitimate, and that, that it is okay to kind of struggle, and that there can be, with those struggles, we can also, find beauty and and growth, you know. And so in some ways it was a breakdown, and in other ways it was a real reckoning that I needed to have in order to kind of move towards healing and repair for myself, for my family, and for the people that I love.
100. Again, it really spoke to me for those reasons. I think like what often feels like a breakdown, it's kind of like the shift that where you kind of start becoming your new self. And that process is often not easy and often requires much healing afterward or continually forever. But I think you were able to show that beauty and growth really, really powerfully. I think about it often, like Blue Chair. Like sometimes I randomly think of that in my head.
Thank you.
And while I'm talking about sort of organizational or like different sections, there's also obviously the book is called Aftershocks, and there's several moments of you sort of speaking about different tectonics. When did you know, how early on in writing this did you know that tectonics would be sort of a guiding metaphor, and how did you get connected to that part?
Yeah, so you know, the book kind of opens, you know, as I've been talking about, the each chapter sort of opens from a memory, and the book opens with this really clear memory that I had of my mother coming, and I hadn't seen her. I was 7, and I hadn't seen her since I was 4. She left when I was 2, and I had this really clear memory of her showing up at our house in Rome, where we were living at the time, with my father and my stepmother. And she showed up at our door kind of to me unannounced. I believe that she had told my father that she was coming, but he hadn't told my sister and I. And and so she arrived on the same day that I heard. My father used to listen to the BBC World Service every morning, and so I heard on the BBC World Service while I was having breakfast that there had been this catastrophic earthquake in Armenia, and that it had destroyed a whole city. And you know, because they said Armenia, and there was this place that it's half of my DNA, but that I was so disconnected to because I didn't grow up with my mother's family. And so I remember asking my father, being really curious, you know, what's going on? What are aftershocks? Where is this city? And it was the same day that my mother showed up at our house. And so I think those two earthquakes, the actual real earthquake, and then the earthquake in my life of my mother showing up just for a day and then leaving again, sort of conflated in me and created this sort of memory that became a story, that became a metaphor that I have lived inside of. And so it happened very organically, sort of the metaphor of the earthquake, although for a long time I didn't fully realize that I was doing it. And it took other people pointing out, you have a lot of earthquakes in this book. You're using a lot of earthquake language. And so we share an agent, Meredith, and she actually was one of the people who sort of pointed out to me, you know, how much I was doing it, and sort of helped me to think about how to be more intentional about that metaphor, since it was something that was really there in the book from the start.
Wow, that's so interesting that it came up so like organically that way. It seems like something that would have like been like sort of pre-planned or something, and that's really beautiful to know that. Um, I just want to. I have another question, but I want to make sure people know they can ask their own questions. I'll get to them in a second in the Q&A section. But so yeah, writing a book is obviously a challenge, but I think it's also a whole different challenge to have written a book, and then it's a whole and have to wait for it to exist in the world, and then it's a whole nother challenge again to have a new book on shelves. So you know, writing a book is one thing. Having finished the process and waiting for like publishing to like do its thing, and like whatever that is, and then now where the book is out and available to the world. I should have started with just saying like, how are you doing? Because there's so much going on, but I wanted to like kind of make sure I got all the questions in. But I'm interested in how you've been navigating the anticipation and release of this really important book.
Thanks. Yeah, so I think, you know, publishing is sort of a long road, and it takes a long time to bring a book into the world. And so I felt so many emotions, you know, leading up to this moment, and I'm continuing to feel so many emotions at once. You went through this too. So I think there's sort of the excitement that it's out in the world, and then also the horror that people are going to be reading it, and then also the world is a trash fire at the
Yeah.
moment. And so it's hard to figure out even what I'm thinking and feeling at any moment, and it often feels like whiplash. But at the same time, I've just been so grateful to have this way to connect with people in this time, particularly after the last year, where I think so many of us have felt so disconnected, and we have this, we're so distant, and socially distancing from our loved ones in many cases. And so in some ways, this process right in this moment is allowing me to reach out and connect to people, and to have conversations about art again, and not just about the trash fire that's happening out in the world. And then I think also in some ways that this book coming out in this moment, although clearly I didn't plan for it to come out in the midst of a pandemic, following sort of a summer of reckoning around racial justice in this country. But I think that in some ways it's fitting that it's coming out now, because it is a book about all of those issues and disorientation and feeling disconnected, and sort of striving to forge deeper ties to people and places, and longing for people and places that I couldn't see, and so I think that a lot of people are wrestling with and struggling with that right now. And so I hope that in some ways, in this, being able to talk about this book in this moment can remind all of us that we have been through, these feelings of dislocation and disconnection before, and we've gone through them, and that we can persist in sort of loving each other and reaching out to each other and supporting each other, even when there are these forces trying to keep us apart. And so that has been a really lovely part of this.
That's, and I think, an important truth to remember. And I think this book will be a godsend for a lot of people right now. The dislocation, the understand, like the reckoning of what your body holds and how that might affect and how that might manifest so many different ways. I think I know people are gonna really like rock with this. I'm so excited for it. I've said it a bunch of times. Before I get into the audience Q&A, maybe just any other thoughts about like what you, I think it's always sort of a precarious thing to have like specific wishes for any book, but if you had like an ideal situation for someone to get from this book, or your hope for like how what the life of this memoir would be, how would you describe that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that I learned in writing this book was that even when I felt like I was living on these borders, or that I was sort of separated from my family because of, even when I was physically with them, or that, always carried these questions about, did I belong here? Do I belong among my family? Where do I fit? Where is home? Even as I was carrying all of those questions, in writing this book, I was reminded of all of the ways that I was so embraced and deeply connected to my family, and that we can make intentional efforts to reach out to people and to try to understand the histories of the places that we come from, and that from that we can get to know ourselves better as well. And that if you've been given stories about who you are, or where you might belong or don't belong, or about the places that you come from that don't serve you, that you can create new stories, and that there are other stories out there that you can draw from. We don't only have to go to, the dominant narratives that often do a lot of us a lot of harm. And so I hope that that's something that people can connect to and draw from in this moment.
I love it. And on that note, I'll enter this Q&A and see what people have in mind. Anonymous says, who are your favorite up-and-coming Ghanaian, if you have any up-and-coming Ghanaian writers right now? No pressure to mention. Yeah.
So there's a writer called Trifina Yaboa. I don't know if I'm saying that well, but she's written some short stories that I think are really amazing. I follow her on Twitter, and I've really enjoyed getting to know her work. There's a writer, a Ghanaian British writer called Derek Owusu. We share a last name, no relation. It's a very common last name, but he's really wonderful. And then actually, I have this. I have an arc of a book called Open Water,
Wow. This is
um, by Caleb Azuma Nelson, who is another British Ghanaian writer who's really wonderful, and this novel is just beautiful. So I would highly recommend that as well.
incredible. I love that. And the arc was ready and everything.
It was just on my desk.
This is what we got to do. Lauren says, love what you said about writing toward love. I was wondering how you approach writing people close to you who you ever worried about would think, writing people close to you. Were you ever worried about what they would think, and how do you grapple with that while writing?
Yes, of course. Of course, I worried about what the people in my life would think, and that's why it was really important to me to kind of make sure that I was writing sort of the complexity and the fullness of who they were as people, and not sort of reducing anyone to a single story, or reducing them to a harm that they had caused me in the past, but really sort of pushing myself to try to write compassionately about the people in my life. And I think when you're writing memoir, when you're writing about people who are real people in your life, that's the best thing that you can do. And then you hope that they see that you are trying to write from a place of love and compassion. And so yeah, I think that worry is always there, and for me, that worry has pushed me to sort of interrogate my own narratives and
Mm.
stories, because I wanted people to be able, and I was really grateful actually. My mom, who is sort of at the center of this book, has been such a big champion for this book. In fact, she's now
Uh,
driving around New England, taking photos of it in the windows of stores. Um,
really dope. Wow.
yeah, it was really, really moving. I'm still so moved by it. And she wrote me this really lovely message that was, it was really hard for her to read certain parts because she knows that, I struggled. And at the same time, she's grateful, as am I, for the relationship that we have now. And it meant a lot to me that she could see that I was writing towards love for her, even as I was sort of writing about the hard parts about our relationship.
That's incredible. I think that's really
Yeah.
beautiful. If you having read the book, I know that I'm sure there are parts that were very difficult for her to read. But again, like that running towards love, that means that's magic. That's like something powerful there. I didn't know that. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Um, Someone says, Nadia, I really appreciate your comments about exploring and sharing your experience with depression. In telling a very personal history, did the story you wanted or needed to tell ever feel in conflict with what you felt comfortable sharing, or that felt too personal to you for others? If so, how did you resolve that feeling of conflict?
Yeah, I mean, I think because when I started writing this book, I think if I were writing it now, probably I would have wrestled with that more. But when I was writing it, I didn't know if anyone would ever read it. And so I really was just trying to capture a lot of these stories for myself and to be as honest as I could be, towards self knowledge, in many ways. And so I didn't wrestle with that as much in writing this book, in terms of, is it too personal, or the conflict about how much do you want to share, because I was sort of writing for myself primarily when
Yeah.
I started. And then I think, yes, with the editing process, when I did realize that I had this ambition and that I wanted it to become a book, then I did have a lot of those questions. But and I did do a lot of revision and editing, and really thought about how to make this book art that other people could connect to as well. But I think because I had done the difficult work of going there, I wasn't about to not put it in the book at that point. And I felt like it was really important to put it in the book.
Love it. And I think that's important for people to hear, people trying to do this kind of work. Let's see what answer the question there. This is another one. Congratulations on the book, and thank you for sharing your very important personal story. 2 questions. Were there any books that you read that served as inspiration for you as you wrote the book? And then the next question is, what should we expect from you next?
Sure, yes, so many books served as inspiration for me, and many of them are in the book. I sort of list in the book what I call sort of a council of mothers that I turn to again and again, and I actually have quotes from all of them. Sort of, you can't see them, but they're posted all around this office. So June Jordan was a huge inspiration of mine, and her memoir and also her poetry collections. Audre Lorde I turn to pretty much every day. I have her books that are sort of on the floor, sitting by my desk. Toni Morrison is a huge influence on me, and has been since I was a child. And one of the things that I really drew from Toni Morrison was this idea of a multi-voiced narrative. And I was trying to think about like the way that connects too with Ghanaian storytelling traditions, which are oral storytelling traditions, and sort of draw from our ancestral sort of spirits. And so that was something that I really wanted to be present in the book. And then she also talks about how in Black American literature that you often it's written to be read out loud. And so she always paid a lot of attention to rhythm. And, my Ghanaian family will often say that rhythm is in our blood and storytelling is in our blood. We have talking drums and storytelling. We have a really old storytelling tradition. And so I drew from all of those writers, and then also from these kind of ancient traditions that have been part of my life since I was a small child.
Incredible. And then what should we expect from you next? This is part 2.
Yeah, so I'm working on a novel at the moment, and it's very early days. And so I'm, sort of playing around with it and writing into it and really enjoying just doing something completely different. And then I'm also really interested in questions around, for obvious reasons, given where we are in the world right now, questions around apologies, accountability, and sort of what we owe each other, how we can live in better community with each other as peoples. And so I'm also writing essays, or starting to explore writing essays on those topics as well.
I am very excited for that, to hear that.
Thank you.
Here's a question from Faith, who says, congratulations. Thanks. I'm so excited to hear about your work. I'm a multiracial Nigerian memoirist who's been writing about identity and home and history for years. Perfect. Magazines love my work, but New York publishers always say my identity is too narrow and specific to attract the audience for a book. Do you think the publishing world is opening up? What was your experience?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I would question the notion that her experience is too narrow, because as a Ghanaian Armenian, like I don't know any other Ghanaian Armenians. I'm sure they exist somewhere in the world, but I think that I don't think anyone's experience or life is too narrow to write. And I think that we all have stories that need to be told, and I think especially stories that haven't been told much, going back to where we started this conversation, are really important right now. And I do think publishing is having a real reckoning. I think I've been sort of paying attention to it. There are a lot of conversations going on about who gets to tell stories, and about people of color in publishing, and sort of the whiteness of publishing. And I think that those conversations are really important, and they need to go deeper, and we need to push them. And I'm sorry that those are the messages that that this writer is getting. Like, just really sorry that those are messages that still exist out in the world. And I hope that, that Nana, you and I can be part of sort of pushing publishing to be more open to more stories like ours that are complicated and not at all narrow. So yeah, I wish the writer very much luck, and we're in this together.
Yeah, Faith, I echo that strongly. These publishers, a lot of the time, they don't know what they're talking about. I say that for sure. Like, they don't know what they're talking about. They have this idea of what I mean, no, I don't even want to get worked up about it. I think I agree with what Nadia said. I if uh, an identity being too narrow and specific to what like the whole thing we want from we want a story. It's not through being generic that a book becomes like approachable. It's by us realizing that through the specific experience, there's resonances that can apply to anyone probably if they're rendered like fully and wholly. So like, yeah, I'm listening to those people. I hope you're not discouraged by
Yeah,
the,
don't be discouraged. I think that's the biggest.
they don't know what they're talking about. Like honestly, they got me upset. Anyways, here goes a question from Anna. Did you have any memories that through research you learned were inaccurate? If so, how did you navigate writing in a way that felt true to you but correctly reflected the past? That's a good question.
That is a really good question. So I had memories that others remember that were really clear memories to me that other people remembered the events differently or remembered experiencing them differently. So there was nothing that, anyone disputed that those events happened, but sort of our interpretations around them, our experiences of them, the specific things that we remembered about them were different. And it was important to me to sort of honor those differences in memory. There are several places in the book where I say that somebody else remembers something differently. And I also have sort of an author's note in the beginning that says that I'm writing my version of this story, but that doesn't mean that I don't believe theirs, because we know that there are facts, there are the facts of the matter, and we're living in a time now where unfortunately for the last 4 years and probably before that, sort of facts can be questioned, and and we can just call them fake news and get away with it. And that's not at all what I'm saying. But I think there are facts and there are truths, and the way each of us experiences the same events and which memories we hold on to from them are different. And so I worked to really honor the memories and experiences of those events, of the people in my life, while staying true to my own memories and experiences and the ways that they shaped me as well.
I I remember seeing that note, author's note, and I'm thinking every memoir should have this in the beginning of it because it felt so correct, it felt so true and honest and transparent. But also, like to me, I can't imagine that not being true for every single memoir that's written. So I really appreciated that note being there, and it also because sometimes I feel like I've been in classes where we've done memoir and we almost not waste time, but we spend a lot of time being like, did this happen exactly? Did this not happen? That whole thing. And that note I think really answered that question really purposefully and powerfully.
Thank you.
Melissa, and in some way you spoke this a little bit before. Melissa says, what was the driving force behind writing this book, and what are you hoping readers will take away?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the driving force for me was to reckon with the griefs and sort of the my experiences in a way that allowed me to see them differently and to open up new possibilities for myself in terms of how I understood my place in the world, my connection to the places where my family came from, and to my family members themselves and other people in my life that I love, and to really sort of revise some harmful stories that I had been given that didn't serve me. So that was sort of the driving force behind it, to get to know my histories in a way that I felt honored me and my family and the places that they came from. And then I think I sort of said this before, but I think that what I hope that people take away is that people can do that we can do that. If we're given a lot of stories that have done us a lot of harm and that we feel shame about, that we can actually revise those stories, and we can be part of sort of a broader revision that reclaims our experiences and puts, particularly for people of color, that that we're putting ourselves in the center of our stories, and I think that that's something that we all have access to, whether you're writing it or not. Even just how you think about yourself and your place in the world.
Beautifully said. And I think on that note, please everybody, Aftershocks is the book. Nadia Owusu is the author. You will not regret owning it. It's a special book. So thank you so much for letting me talk to you today.
Thank you so much, Nana. It's so good to see you.
No, I feel very lucky to get to talk to you about this. And I think Politics and Prose might have some last words to send us off. All right about that?
Yeah, thank you both for agreeing to have this event with us. Nadia, it was great being able to host you for your debut memoir. And Nana, thank you for being a great moderator for the event. Those watching, we thank you for joining us this evening. You can purchase your copy of Aftershocks at politics-prose.com. You can also purchase Nana's short story collection, Friday Black, from there as well. Before we sign off, what are you two reading at the moment? We like to throw that question out at there as well.
Sure, I can start. So I am reading The African Lookbook by Catherine McKinley. It's a really wonderful book. I highly recommend it. And I am anxiously awaiting my copy of Milk, Blood, Heat by Dontiel Moniz. I've been waiting for that book for a long time. And I got a message that it has shipped. So I'm very excited about that. Brilliant short stories.
Milk, Blood, Heat is another one of the books I'm most excited for this year. Milk, Blood, Heat, and Aftershocks are both going to be spectacular. Those are my books that I'm really looking forward to most. It's annoying when people ask me this question and it's like the answer is a book that they can't get, and it's like always the case. But I'm always behind on trying to do blurbs and stuff, or at least or just like getting books. But I'm reading a book called My Monticello by Jocelyn Nicole Johnson, which will be available sooner rather than later, and I think it's incredible. So that's one, and a short story collection called Land of Big Numbers, which is another incredible, really incredible book. I read that a little bit ago, but I want to give that one a shout out as well.
All right. Well, thank you for giving us those book recommendations. And I'd like to wish everyone a good night and stay well read.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, y'all.